Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth installment in my Road to No Way Home series, the series where I have taken it upon myself to go back and rewatch all of the live action Spider Man films leading up to and then including Spider Man No Way Home, which I'm personally very excited for. I just finished the Sam Raimi trilogy and is together in a playlist if you would like to go back and check out those videos. And now I'm going to be tackling Mark Webb's The Amazing Spider Man series, which I'm not that big a fan of, to be honest. I didn't really like it when I was a kid, and as I got older, I kind of grew more disdain for it. But this is like the first time that I've legitimately like rewatched it. I rewatched it a couple of years ago, but I just watched it. I didn't really give it much thought, and I was like, still don't really like it. But this is the first time I really sat down, rewatched it with the purpose of deconstructing the movie for a review in this format, and I have a lot to say about it. So before I get into it, I would like to say that just like the previous three videos in this series, this will be spoiler heavy. If you haven't seen The Amazing Spider-Man, obviously you can leave if you want. If you have seen it or you don't care, then please enjoy what I'm going to say. Before I get into the negatives, because I have more to say on that than I do the positives, I want to talk about the positives because I didn't completely hate this movie. I did have my issues with it because it has flaws. However, it does have positives that I did really like. The hottest take that I probably have is that I actually like the Amazing Spider-Man suit, the original one that Peter wears in the first movie, which most people hate that suit. I am the small minority that doesn't hate that suit. I really like it. I thought it was cool. It does look weird and leathery, which isn't normally how Peter's suits look, but I don't know. It just worked for me. I thought it looked cool. I can't really explain it. It's just my own personal taste. I thought it looked cool, so that's just how I feel about it. I know everyone almost collectively hates the suit. I'm probably the one person on the planet who doesn't hate it. But nevertheless, that's a positive I can give for the movie, is that I personally like the suit. Another is that this probably has the best effects of any Spider-Man movie. Like between the MCU and the Sam Raimi trilogy, this probably has the best effects in my opinion. It looks really cool. I very much enjoyed the cinematography that it had on display. It looked nice because it has a nice blend of practical and CG, which Sam Raimi did more practical, which was cool, and then as a product of the time, the CG didn't look as great because it wasn't as advanced as it is today. And then the MCU, I feel like is a little bit too CGI heavy, but it still looks nice. This seems like a perfect middle ground. It has well enough um, effects. It has well enough technology effects so that everything looks real enough that it's not jarring, and then the practicality that is on display blends in nicely with the effects. So that is something that I really did enjoy. All of the acting in the film is top notch. Andrew Garfield, everyone knows he's a great actor despite what people have to say about his role as Spider Man. Emma Stone is great as Gwen Stacy. I really liked her. Everyone in this movie does a really good job. The worst person in this movie is probably Aunt May. She doesn't really have much to say. She's just kind of there for a few scenes, but that's about it. But she was actually no, that's not true. The worst actress in this movie is probably Peter's mother because she has like a couple of lines and that's it. She doesn't really get to display her acting chops, but it's not important. Her role isn't important. Um, I think that's really it. If I'm being honest, I don't have many. Oh, right, the lizard. 50% of this is what's accurate. I like the lizard's design. I like how he looks, except for his face. I wish they would have given him a lizard face, like like how he had in the comics, with the long, protruding thing that a normal lizard has. But they gave him like a human face. He looked like a Goomba from the Super Mario Brothers movie. But eh, so I partially like the lizard design. Up until his face, everything looks great. Love it, 100%. Um, yeah, I think that's it. Unfortunately, for the positives that I have for The Amazing Spider-Man. Now to get into the nitty-gritty of how I truly feel about this movie. And this is going to be a little different than my usual reviews because I usually just kind of ramble a bit. I'm going to try and be more focused with this because I have genuine issues with the writing. However, I believe this could have been a really good Spider-Man movie if it didn't have these few flaws. The first and most important flaw being is that the Amazing Spider-Man has a misunderstanding of Peter Parker, and this is something that happened in other superhero movies, like from the Amazing Spider-Man up until Batman vs Superman. There was a misunderstanding between those three films between 2012 and 2016. There's a misunderstanding of these superheroes, of their origin stories, and I don't understand where it came from. It didn't work, and all three of those movies didn't really work very well for like the general populace, because not everyone liked it. It's not like there's a minority of people who hate it. There's a mixed bag for all of those films. And the reason for that is because they regress the character to a state that they've never been in, and then the character earns their original status that people know them as throughout the film, which I know sounds a little weird and might be difficult to understand from the way I just phrased it, but let me explain. So, before I get into The Amazing Spider-Man, I'm going to use Batman v Superman and Man of Steel as examples to explain what is wrong with Peter that I feel like in The Amazing Spider-Man. In Man of Steel, Clark Kent, at least in the comics and the animated series and other formats that he's been in, is a happy-go-lucky Boy Scout. He's a kind-hearted person. He always helps. He's always nice. Its perfect display is in the recent series that just came out, Superman and Lois, which I think is a fantastic show. So Clark is a generally nice person. He's genuinely nice. He cares for people. That's what's on display for him from when he's young, even in the past, like Smallville, where it focuses more on his younger years. He still has that mentality. However, in Man of Steel, he isn't like that. Clark is regressed to a point where he is dark and brooding, and then over the course of the movie, he builds up the character that we know him as in the comics and other forms of media that we've seen Clark in. And he becomes Clark Kent that we know about, and he then also becomes Superman. But it doesn't feel right, and the same thing happens with Batman in Batman vs. Superman. The most iconic and the best Batman stories are the ones where Batman has a code of conduct, where he refuses to kill people. That's his code. However, in Batman v Superman, he doesn't have that code. He kills criminals, he brutalizes them in ways that Batman usually doesn't do, and then over the course of the movie, he learns to go back to the version of Batman that most people know him as and accept him as. And that is what happens to Peter in The Amazing Spider-Man. Peter is usually a nerdy, kind-hearted kid. He's shy around the people that he likes. He doesn't have many friends. He gets bullied, but, he still keeps his chin up. That's Peter Parker. In this, those traits are all there. However, Peter is also a skater punk who has more confidence than Peter Parker usually has before he gains his spider abilities, which is shown very early on in the movie. In the first couple of scenes where Peter is shown, Peter is, walking through the halls of Midtown High. He runs into this cute girl, and she's just like, "Hey, Peter, right? I like your pictures." He's like, "Oh, yeah, thanks." And she asks him if he's free on Friday, and Peter's like, "Yeah, I'm free." And then she's like, "Oh, great, because I'd like you to take pictures of my boyfriend's car. I wanted to give it to him as a birthday present." Now, the Peter Parker that I know and that I grew up with would have taken the pictures. He would have been like, okay, he would have felt upset about it that he didn't get a date with this person, but he would have still accepted it. But Andrew Garfield's Peter is like, once he finds out that she wants to take the pictures for her boyfriend and isn't asking Peter on a date, he's like, "Oh, actually, I gotta check my schedule because, I don't know what's going on." Like, it's just like, where did this confidence come from? You were just like rambling a moment ago. You didn't really know how to say anything because she thought she asked you out on a date, and then now you're just like, "Oh, well, I have to check my schedule. I'm not too sure." And then he rides off on his skateboard, and I'm just like, who is this Chad? Like, that's not Peter. At least not the Peter that I know. And it gets worse from there on, because then usually Peter Parker is the one who's bullied by Flash Thompson, which Peter is picked on by Flash. However, Peter stands up for himself and stands up for others. He ends up starting a fight with Flash. He doesn't just ask Flash, because he sees Flash bullying a kid later on. He's like holding the kid upside down, like stuffing his face in some lunch food for whatever stupid reason. And Peter walks up, he's like, yo, Flash, come on, man, just put him down. He's like, yo, Flash, come on. And then instead of like, walking up and like being like, come on, Flash, just stop, come on, just put him down, he humiliates him by calling Flash by his real name, because Flash doesn't like his real name. His real name is Eugene. He finds that embarrassing. So that's what Peter does. He calls him Eugene in front of the entire school, and then Flash gets pissed and hits him and starts a fight with him. And as he's beating on Peter, Peter's just like, ugh, start taking the picture, Eugene. And I'm just like, where is all of this confidence coming from? Where's this edge and grit coming from for this character? Peter usually doesn't have that personality trait. Like, yes, Peter is courageous. He will stand up for people, but like the way he's doing it doesn't feel natural for Peter Parker as a character. And then it gets progressively worse from here, is that Peter has like a chip on his shoulder because of one major flaw that I think this franchise as a whole has. It focuses way too much on Peter Parker's parents. For perspective, I'm 23. I've been a fan of Spider-Man since I was a very little child. I remember watching the 90s show as it aired on television. I remember watching the MTV Spider-Man as it aired, Spectacular Spider-Man, seeing all the Sam Raimi trilogy movies in theaters. I was, it came out 2012, so I was 13 when The Amazing Spider-Man came out, saw that in theaters too. Like, I have been a fan of Spider-Man my entire life. And to this day, I do not know what Peter's mother's name is because she doesn't matter. The only reason I know what his father's name is because they mention it multiple times in this franchise. Peter Parker's parents, in my eyes and pretty much everyone else's eyes, are May and Ben Parker, his aunt and uncle. They are the ones who are important to his character. They are the ones that matter. Richard and whatever his mother's name is, Parker, don't matter. So I don't understand who was sitting in the writing room and thought it was a great idea to make a major focal point, not just this movie, but the franchise as a whole, be about Peter Parker's biological parents. It just baffles me. I don't understand where that came from. But because they put that in this movie, Peter has a chip on his shoulder because he didn't get to grow up with his parents like he wanted to. So he's edgy and angsty and he lashes out at people because, he's all brooding because he didn't get to spend time with his family. As a matter of fact, that's what leads to Uncle Ben's death. It's one of the factors that leads to Uncle Ben's death. Because in the Amazing Spider-Man series, well, first I'll reference the Sam Raimi series. In Sam Raimi's series, what leads Uncle Ben's death is that Peter gets driven by Uncle Ben to Manhattan so that he can sneak off and go and fight in the wrestling tournament so he can make some money to buy a car so he can impress MJ. And while Uncle Ben is waiting for Peter, that's when he gets assaulted by Flint Marko and gets shot. In this, however, Peter with Sam Raimi's trilogy, sorry for rambling a little bit, it makes sense. It has a cohesion. It is Peter's fault 100%. Peter, shirked down on his responsibilities, which led Uncle Ben to want to have a talk with him, which led him to drive him to the city, which led him to being stranded out there waiting for Peter because Peter lied about where he was going. And then he let the crook get away and shoot him. That's what led to Uncle Ben's death in Sam Raimi's trilogy. In this, Peter, he doesn't pick up Aunt May from work, which leads Uncle Ben to be upset. So he tells Peter to speak to his aunt and apologize, and then they get into an argument over, the fact that Peter doesn't have his mom and dad in his life, and then Peter storms off. So then Ben follows after him, trying to find him, and then Ben ends up getting shot in a ridiculous scene. It's just so stupid. Like, the scene where he dies is just the most ridiculous thing ever, because everyone in that scene is a jerk. No one in that scene is justified in the right. Peter goes to a convenience store to buy some milk while he's upset with his aunt and his uncle. And when he's there, he goes to buy the milk, and the guy's like, "Yeah, dude, you're short 2 pennies. I can't sell you the milk." But he says it in like a jerk way. He's not nice about it, how I just described it. He's being a jackass about it. And Peter is like, "What? But it's just 2 cents. Just give me 2 cents." And he's like, "No, I can't do that." And Peter's like, and he storms off. And then the guy who was behind Peter online is the criminal who would kill his Uncle Ben. He knocks over something to distract the cashier, he steals money out the register, and he throws Peter the bottle of milk. It's like, okay, so the crook is the bad guy, Peter is the bad guy for being obnoxious, because Peter should have just accepted the fact that he didn't have the money to buy his milk and left, and then the cashier is also the bad guy because he was being a jerk to Peter over something so minor as not having enough money to buy something. So then when Peter leaves and the guy starts running off with the money, the cashier who was working at the convenience store is like, "Hey, yo, bro, help me stop this armed thief that just robbed the store." And Peter's just like, "Not my problem." And then as the guy is running down the street, no, he's like a block away. Uncle Ben shouldn't have known what was going on at that point. So like the guy trips and he drops his handgun in front of Uncle Ben, and then Uncle Ben rushes to grab the handgun to stop the man from something he doesn't know that he was doing, which is ridiculous. Like, why would you do that? Like, if I'm speaking to you, the audience here now. If you were on the street and then somebody dropped a gun in front of you, for starters, you don't know if they have a concealed carry license. That could just be their gun to begin with. Second of all, do not pick up that gun because you do not know the kind of person that has it. They could be a law-abiding citizen. They could be a psychopath. You don't know. So why would you rush to it and get into a fight with somebody who was carrying a weapon? And then Uncle Ben gets shot and he dies. That's it. That's his death. And then Peter, because he hears the gunshot, he walks back up a block and he sees that it's Uncle Ben, which doesn't work for me. I feel like it worked better in Sam Raimi's trilogy because like Peter was going to meet Uncle Ben in the first place, which is what led him to find Uncle Ben dead. That worked out better than Peter hearing a gunshot a block away and then deciding to walk towards the gunshot. That was ridiculous. I don't know what made him think that was a good idea, but it's stupid. Oh, man. Oh, man. So dumb. Anyway, on the regression of Peter's character. So, you should probably get the point by now that Peter Parker in this movie is a jerk. He is not a good person. He isn't even recognizable to the Peter Parker that I know from different interpretations that I've seen between comic books, movies, TV shows, video games, etc. I don't recognize this Peter Parker. He has other elements that are way more focused on than his original character elements. The whole aspect of him having a chip on his shoulder over his family and this new angst and this skater punk vibe that he has going is more prevalent than the original characteristics of Peter Parker. And this brings me to the point of the secondary problem of this movie is that Spider-Man doesn't feel like Spider-Man. This is a byproduct of the fact that Peter Parker doesn't feel like Peter because unlike a lot of superheroes where it's like the person behind the mask and in front of the mask are two different people, that's not how it is for Peter. Peter's the same person behind and in front of the mask. It's just a matter of what he's dealing with. Because there was, if you haven't seen it, there was a behind the scenes thing of the show creators of The Spectacular Spider-Man where they showcased how they write the stories. And it was broken up into basically 3 charts, which is Peter Parker's life, Spider-Man's life, and then how they all connect together. Because that's important. Everything that Peter does as Spider-Man affects his life as Peter. Everything that Peter does as Peter affects his life as Spider-Man. They're interconnected 100%. So, since Peter is a jerk, Spider-Man is now a jerk. So after Uncle Ben dies, Peter decides to become a vengeful vigilante and starts hunting down criminals who look like the man that killed his Uncle Ben. Which is fine. Okay, fine. If you want to start there, I understand that. However, Peter becomes Spider-Man while he's still on this vengeful quest, which is ridiculous. I don't know who decided that Peter should don the full suit, become Spider-Man, swinging around the city, have all of his tech and everything ready, and like have this bombastic music showing that Peter is Spider-Man when he still hasn't learned the meaning of being a hero. This is something I didn't mention when Peter and Uncle Ben had their fight, but this is a nitpick that's ridiculous to me, is that Peter doesn't learn with great power comes great responsibility. Uncle Ben says something that more or less means the same thing. It's like a long, drawn out sentence, but at the end of the day, it means the same thing. So I don't know why they didn't just use that phrase. I don't get it. They probably wanted to have their own original take and make it sound special, but it was stupid because Uncle Ben's speech is like, Peter, your father Richard lived by a code that if you have the ability to do something right, then that means you have the moral obligation and the responsibility to do what's right. And it's like, what? I vividly remember sitting in the theater at 13 years old, watching that movie, and then I was like, oh, okay, this is the scene where Uncle Ben's gonna say, with great power comes great responsibility. And then he said that long, drawn out sentence, and I was just sitting there like, huh? What? What are you talking about, sir? Sir, do you need a glass of milk? Because what's going on? You need a Snickers? Because you're not acting like yourself right now. It was just, it's ridiculous. So Peter is told that, but he doesn't learn the lesson when Uncle Ben dies, which is what usually happens to Peter when Uncle Ben dies. Uncle Ben dies as a result of Peter's actions, but that's not really the case here. You can't blame Peter for the crook getting away in this scenario, because I'm going to keep referencing Sam Raimi's trilogy because it's what predated and it's by the same studio. In Sam Raimi's trilogy, Peter was in full control of his abilities. He easily could have stopped the crook, and he had reason to. He was clearly an armed thief. You knew that. He was a bad guy. Peter should have stopped him. But in this case, him and Peter are just kind of like jerks. And it's like, Peter didn't know he was an armed thief. He didn't know he had a gun. Sure, he robbed the store, which was wrong. So Peter ideally should have stopped him because he is capable of stopping him with his new abilities. But, like, you as an average person on the street, if you see someone rob a store, you're not going to automatically run up and beat the hell out of them to stop them. That's not something that's going to happen. So, I get it. Peter should have done the right thing and stopped him, but at the same time, it just doesn't have the same emotional impact and weight as you would expect from Uncle Ben's death. So it just feels wrong to me. And all of that leads into why Peter doesn't feel right when he's Spider-Man. Because after he dons the suit and everything, he's catching a bunch of criminals that look like the killer of Uncle Ben. And when he does catch one person, after he's fully become Spider-Man, he's in the suit, he webs the guy up to a wall, he's screwing around with him, and then he looks at the guy's arm and he's like, ooh, this could have got a lot worse. And I'm just like, who is this supervillain right now? What is happening here? And then Peter flees from the police, and then fast forwarding a bit to something that I didn't really enjoy in the movie that I'll mention briefly before continuing, about Peter's character not feeling correct, because it's important to the story, is Gwen Stacy. I like Gwen Stacy. I think Emma Stone did a good job in the portrayal, except for the fact, like, every time she speaks, she has this weird, sexy whisper instead of just talking like a normal person. I don't understand the decision for that, but it is what it is. So Peter and Emma's relationship, Peter and Gwen's relationship escalate really fast. Like, Peter asks her out on a date once, and they never actually go on the date, and then she asks him to come over for dinner as if they've been dating for a while. It's weird. I kind of just moved on from it. And when Peter goes over to Gwen's house to have dinner, he ends up talking to her father, who is Captain Stacy, a police officer, and they end up getting into a conversation about Spider-Man, and Peter's like, well, I think he's a hero, like, he's trying to do what's right. I think he stands for the same thing as you. And Captain Stacy, granted, he does it in the most incessantly jerky way possible, which Captain Stacy is a grown man with 3 children, and he's married. He shouldn't act this way to a 17 or 18-year-old. Because, no, I want to say Peter's 17, because he graduates in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, so that means he's at least 17 in this movie to a 17-year-old. There's no reason he should have acted so vile towards a 17-year-old. I don't care if he's dating your daughter. There's no reason that he should have acted in this way. Anyway, he says in the most jerk way possible that Spider-Man is a menace, that he acts like he has a personal vendetta because he's going after specific types of criminals instead of, just like genuinely, geez, I keep screwing up that word today, helping. And Peter gets flustered and he's like, well, he's trying to help because obviously Peter is Spider-Man and he thought he was doing good, but he wasn't. So this is Peter's reality check that he's not doing the right thing. And then moments later, Peter runs off and he goes and he gets into a fight with the Lizard on a bridge and he ends up saving a bunch of people. And alright, I'm not gonna lie, this scene here is probably one of my favorite Spider-Man moments in a live action movie so far. It's a beautiful moment for Spider-Man specifically. It's a great superhero moment in general. Probably one of the best is the moment where Peter goes to save a child who's trapped in a burning car that's dangling off of a bridge. Peter climbs up there, and first the kid sees him, and he sees this guy in this weird leather mask and everything, and he starts freaking out, so Peter pulls off the mask, and he's like, hey, see? I'm just a normal guy. And then he hands the kid the mask, and he's like, the mask will give you strength. And as Peter's trying to, crawl down to the kid, the car starts falling more, so Peter has to hold it with one hand and hold the web to the bridge with the other, and he's like, kid, I need you to climb up the car. And the kid's like, I can't do it. He's like, then put my mask on. It'll give you the power to climb up. So that's what the kid does. He puts the mask on, he gives him confidence, he climbs up the car, and then Peter webs him and pulls him out, and he saves him, and he brings him to his father, and then this is the first time in the franchise where Peter is officially called Spider-Man. They ask him what his name is, he tells them Spider-Man, and he becomes a hero. The guy whose child he saved comes back into play later at the end of the movie, but I'll get to that later. So that's the first time that Peter is called Spider-Man in the movie. It is a really nice moment that I really like. However, it doesn't feel right because Peter has been Spider-Man up until this point. It feels wrong because Peter and Spider-Man don't have their personalities aligned. They don't understand with great power comes great responsibility until this very moment, which isn't right. It feels wrong. You spend half of this movie watching a character that you don't like develop into a character that you already knew and wanted to see a movie about. Which is the problem that I have the most with this movie, is that it takes Peter Parker and Spider-Man and regresses them into this edgy, angsty state, and then develops them back to the way that they're supposed to be, and then starts telling a story that's interesting. I think the second half of this movie works out a lot better, because from that point forward, Peter is more like the way you would expect Peter Parker to act. Spider-Man is more like the way you would expect Spider-Man to act, because they have learned what they were supposed to have learned long ago. So, to get through the main antagonist, because I haven't mentioned Kirk Connors yet, because I've been focusing more on Peter, because I felt that's the main flaw of the movie. Kirk Connors, really good character. I enjoy him. For those who don't know, Kirk Connors is a scientist who was missing one arm. He worked with Peter Parker's father. He developed a scientific formula for cross-species genetics in order to blend human and animal DNA together in an attempt to regrow his arm and help other people with different diseases and so on. So he's forced into a position where he has to take the serum for himself, and that turns him into the Lizard, and it drives him crazy, and he thinks that the best way to help people is to turn everyone in New York City into a lizard, and he goes to set off a cloud bomb that would turn everybody into New York into lizards. So Peter obviously has to stop him, and Peter feels responsible for him being this way because Peter gave him the equation that his father was working on earlier in the movie that allowed him to turn himself into the Lizard. Obviously Peter didn't know that he would turn into the Lizard, but that's what happened, and Peter feels responsible for this, so Peter has to stop Kirk Connors. So the final half of this movie is Peter dealing with the Lizard. So Peter is going up against Kurt. There's some really nice cinematography where Peter's on this web that he creates in the sewers trying to track down Kurt. They get into a few fights. It's really nice. There's a beautiful sequence where Peter is running away as Spider-Man from the police trying to reach Kirk Connors to stop him from doing his plan, and he gets injured, and Captain Stacy has him at gunpoint, and Peter reveals himself to him, and he tells him that Gwen's in danger, and Captain Stacy lets him go, and Peter gets shot by a different cop and is injured during the escape. And this another great Spider-Man moment is because Peter saved the little kid earlier in the movie on the bridge. The guy who was his father is the crane operator. He's like a foreman. So he calls all of the other foremans in the city and has their crane operators line up a path for Peter to swing, because since he got shot in the leg by the cop a few moments ago, he can't really move the way he wants to, and he can't reach Oscorp Tower as fast as he needs to. So then they line up the cranes, he swings there, he gets into a fight with the lizard, everything's great, puts the serum into the machine. He cures everybody that the lizard had turned into. The lizard was like a couple of cops. And during the fight, Gwen's father, Captain Stacy, helps out Peter in the fight, and he dies. And this is the final part of the movie where I think Peter doesn't work out for me personally, is that Peter Captain Stacy, when he's dying, asks Peter to stay away from Gwen because he believes that Peter will put her in harm's way, which is true. That does happen. If you don't know, in the comic books, Gwen Stacy is notoriously known as Peter Parker's girlfriend who dies by being killed by the Green Goblin. It's a big thing that I won't get into now. But so Peter accepts, and he stays away from Gwen until the end of the movie, where he has a conversation with Aunt May, who is usually Peter's moral compass, who helps him through things. She basically tells him, "Hey, Peter, you should go hook up with that girl." And she's like, Aunt May, no, 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 no. You shouldn't be telling him this. This is like, no. Why did you do that? So then Peter goes up to Gwen, and there's like a whole scenario that it was a cute scene, but it just feels wrong for Peter Parker's character, where he's like, the best promise is the one that you have to break, and like Gwen smiles, and that's the end of the movie, which is terrible. Peter Parker is a character who is notoriously known. Spider-Man in general is notoriously known for his perseverance and not giving up when things are bad. He is not the kind of person who would go back on his word when he vows it to someone. And this is just a fundamentally terrible ending. Peter Parker would not spit on the hopes and prayers of someone that he promised on their deathbed that he would stay away from someone. He wouldn't do that. And this just feels wrong to me as a fan of Spider-Man. As a movie, if I knew nothing about Spider-Man, I'd probably love this movie. But unfortunately, I'm not in that camp. I like Spider-Man. I know about his character. So when I see all the flaws in The Amazing Spider-Man to do with Peter and Spider-Man, it just feels wrong to me, and it makes me increasingly upset, and I wish there was better writing in the movie. I understand what Mark Webb was going for. He did put a lot of heart into the movie, which I wish he could have panned out more and worked out better, in my opinion, but I just can't say that I like The Amazing Spider-Man with all the flaws that it has. It doesn't work out for me. And then there's an after credit scene with a weird guy in a hat and mask. It's super weird. Doesn't really matter. But anyway, that's the main thing, is Peter Parker is flawed in this movie, and it really tarnishes it if you're a fan of Spider-Man. If not, then I'm sure you probably just love this movie regardless. Like I said, good acting, good cinematography, etc. But unfortunately, I can't get into The Amazing Spider-Man all too much. I think it has its ups, but most of them are downs due to character writing. But at the end of the day, that'll be the end of this video. Next week, I will be covering The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which unfortunately is the worst Spider-Man movie ever created. I'm sorry to all the people that worked on this movie, but that's just how I personally feel about it. And hit the like button, subscribe. The amazing thumbnail is by my good friend CuriTuber, so check out his Twitch channel. He's really good. And remember, folks, you're innocent until proven villainous.